My dearest YouTube family, I hope you're all well. Today I come to you with a heavy heart to share something deeply personal. Storyverse Hub is not just a channel to me, it's a part of my soul, my passion, and my connection with all of you. I never imagined I'd have to step away, even temporarily, but life has presented me with a challenge I cannot ignore. Last night, while recording a voiceover, I experienced severe chest pain. At first I dismissed it, hoping it would pass. But as it intensified, I knew something was wrong. After seeking medical attention, I received difficult news. There is a problem with my heart. My doctor has strongly advised me to rest and prioritize my health. It breaks my heart to take a break from YouTube, to step away from sharing stories the way I love. But I know that without focusing on my well-being, I won't be able to return with the energy and passion you deserve. Please know this isn't goodbye. I am determined to come back stronger. In the meantime, I will try to share 2 stories in my own voice each month. To keep our storytelling journey alive, my dear brother, Mr. James, has kindly agreed to step in. He will be narrating the stories, pouring his heart into every word just as I would. I assure you his dedication and passion will bring each story to life. All I ask from you is your support and prayers. Please pray for my swift recovery so I can return to you stronger than ever. Your unwavering love and encouragement mean the world to me. Until that day comes, know that you are always in my heart. With all my love, your name. Hello everyone, I'm James, and it's an honor to step in for my beloved sibling during this challenging time. I understand how much these stories mean to you, and I accept this responsibility not just as a duty, but as a promise. I vow to give each story the same heartfelt touch that you've come to cherish. Together, we will keep the magic alive. Thank you for your trust and support. Now, without further ado, let's dive into today's story. Stay blessed and keep believing in the power of stories. Please, I don't belong here, she whispered, her voice trembling. But Miller only let out a low chuckle, devoid of humor. Spare me the act, he drawled, his voice slow and mocking. His fingers adjusted the edges of his cufflinks with practiced precision, as if her presence was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. You women always know how to put on a show, but I've seen it all before, and I don't fall for cheap tricks. Mona shook her head rapidly, desperation bleeding into her features. No, you don't understand. I was brought here by mistake. I'm not who you think I am. Her voice rose in panic, but Miller's patience was already fraying. His eyes darkened, his jaw clenched, and he leaned in just enough for his breath to ghost over her trembling lips. Enough, he bit out, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I don't tolerate liars, and I certainly don't tolerate gold diggers who think they can play me. A shiver ran down Mona's spine. She had never encountered such cruelty, such unrelenting disdain. His words sliced through her, leaving her trembling, her back pressed against the cold glass. But there was no escape. I swear I'm telling the truth, she choked out, tears spilling freely. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I've never done anything like this before. I don't even know why I'm here. Miller was unmoved. He had heard every excuse, every lie spun by women who claimed innocence. But he knew the game too well. His lips curled into a slow, predatory smirk. He reached out, his fingers grazing her jaw, forcing her to meet his piercing gaze. You came to the wrong man to play your tricks, he murmured, his touch deceptively gentle. And tonight, you're going to pay for it. Mona's breath hitched, terror clawing at her throat. She shook her head frantically, hands trembling as she gripped his wrist in a futile attempt to push him away. Please, don't do this, she begged, her voice raw with desperation. But Miller only watched her, his cruel amusement evident. Begging won't save you, he said, relishing the tears streaking down her face. Women like you prey on men. You think a few tears will make them fall at your feet. Not me, sweetheart. I don't fall. Each word was a dagger, cutting deeper, leaving her breathless and shaking. I'm not lying, she sobbed, her voice cracking. But his verdict was sealed. In his eyes, she had already been condemned. His fingers traced along her jaw once more, his touch both possessive and punishing. I don't believe in innocence, he whispered darkly. And I certainly don't believe in innocent little girls who claim they don't belong here. Tears continued to stream down Mona's cheeks. She was trapped in his world, beneath his unrelenting gaze, with no hope of escape. But even as the walls closed in around her, she refused to stop fighting, because no matter what he believed, she knew the truth, and she would not surrender to the monster who refused to see it. He wanted to touch her, to hold her, to wipe away her tears, to somehow take back the damage he had done. But she wouldn't let him. She didn't trust him anymore. And why should she? He had been cruel to her, treated her like a pawn in his twisted game of punishment. He had ignored her pleas, her cries, her innocence. He had assumed the worst of her, stripped her of her dignity, and stolen something precious from her, something that could never be returned. Now there was no undoing it, no fixing it. The weight of that truth crushed him, suffocated him, made it impossible to think. He had always believed himself to be untouchable, invincible. But now standing here, staring at the broken girl before him, he had never felt weaker. "Mona," he whispered, his voice raw, strained, desperate. But she didn't respond. She didn't even acknowledge him. She just lay there, trembling, silent tears slipping down her face, her breathing shallow and uneven. It was as if she had given up, as if the fight had drained from her, leaving nothing but the shattered remnants of the girl she had once been. And he had done that to her. A lump formed in his throat, thick and suffocating. His hands clenched into fists as he struggled to keep himself from reaching for her. The urge was unbearable, the need to comfort her, to fix this, to erase the pain in her eyes. But he couldn't. He didn't have that right anymore. He had taken away her choice, stolen her trust, and destroyed something sacred. And now all he could do was stand here, drowning in his own self-hatred. His chest ached, his pulse roared in his ears, his mind screamed at him, demanding to know how he had let this happen. How had he become the very thing he despised? He had always prided himself on being in control, on never making mistakes. But this was the biggest mistake of his life, and it was too late to fix it, too late to undo the damage he had caused, too late to change the way she looked at him now, with fear, disgust, and heartbreak. His breath came out uneven, his hands trembling as he took another step back, as if physically distancing himself from her would somehow lessen the unbearable weight in his chest. But it didn't. Nothing could. He had hurt her. He had broken her. And now he had to live with that. A suffocating silence stretched between them, heavy and unbearable. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to beg for her forgiveness, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down he knew no apology would ever be enough. No words could ever erase the pain he had caused. And the worst part? He wasn't sure if he would ever forgive himself for it. He had thought himself incapable of feeling, incapable of love. But now as he stood here, drowning in guilt and remorse, he realized the truth. Mona had changed him, and nothing would ever be the same again. Miller had always been a man of control, a man who dictated every aspect of his life with ruthless precision. But for the first time, he felt utterly powerless. The weight of what he had done to Mona consumed him, an unrelenting force that gnawed at his soul, refusing to let him rest. He couldn't erase the image of her trembling body, her tear-filled eyes, the way she had recoiled from him as if he were a monster. And maybe he was. Maybe he had become the very thing he had sworn he would never be. But he couldn't accept that he couldn't let it end this way. He needed to fix it. He needed to make it right. But more than that, he needed her. The realization struck him with the force of a hurricane, unraveling everything he thought he knew about himself. It wasn't just guilt that bound him to her. It was something far darker, far deeper. It was obsession, a hunger, a need so overpowering that it consumed his every thought. He couldn't let her go. He wouldn't. Even if she hated him, even if she wanted nothing to do with him, he would find a way to keep her, to make her his, not just in his bed, not just as an object of desire, but as something far more. He wanted her heart, her soul, her love, and he would do anything to have it. Without another word, he scooped her up in his arms, ignoring her protests as he carried her back to the car. "Let me go!" she screamed, pounding her fists against his chest. But he didn't flinch. His grip only tightened, as if afraid she would disappear the moment he loosened his hold. He climbed into the car, keeping her firmly in his lap as the doors locked around them. "Drive," he ordered, his voice a low command. The car sped off into the night. Mona trembled against him, her body tense, her mind racing. She couldn't believe this was happening. She had been so close to freedom, but now she was back in his grasp. And this time, she knew he wouldn't let her go so easily. "You don't get to run from me, Mona," he murmured against her hair, his voice almost tender but laced with a dangerous edge. "You belong to me." A shiver ran down her spine at his words, at the possessiveness in his tone. "You're insane," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He let out a dark chuckle, his fingers tracing a slow path down her arm. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I don't care. I need you, and I won't let you leave me." His confession sent a jolt through her, but she refused to believe it. He didn't love her. He couldn't. This wasn't love. This was obsession. And yet, as he held her against him, as his fingers trembled slightly against her skin, she felt something shift between them. She didn't know what it was, fear or something far more dangerous, but one thing was certain. She was trapped, not just in his arms, but in the storm that was Miller himself. And no matter how much she wanted to escape, some part of her knew she never truly would. Miller had always been ruthless, crushing anyone who stood in his way, ensuring that no one could ever control or manipulate him. But now, for the first time in his life, he was afraid. Not of losing money, power, or status, but of losing her. Mona, the girl he had wronged, the girl who made his cold heart beat for the first time, the girl who now looked at him with nothing but pain and fear in her eyes. He had spent days trying to soften her hatred, trying to make her see that he wasn't just a monster, that he could love, that he could change. But no matter what he did, she refused to forgive him. And then Lucas entered the picture. Lucas was Miller's greatest enemy, a rival businessman who had always wanted to destroy him. Their war had been waged in silence, in secret battles fought behind closed doors, hostile takeovers, stolen deals, backstabbing negotiations. But this time, Lucas had something more valuable than money or business deals. He had found Miller's weakness. He had found Mona, and for a man like Lucas, exploiting a weakness was second nature. He had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When he saw Mona's fear, her desperation, her longing to escape, he knew he had found the key to Miller's destruction. So with a devil's charm and a vulture's patience, he made his move. It happened on a night when Mona had finally managed to be alone, away from Miller's suffocating presence. She had been pacing in the garden of his grand estate, staring at the iron gates that separated her from the rest of the world, her heart aching with the urge to run. That's when she saw him, a tall, handsome man leaning against a sleek black car just outside the gates, his piercing eyes watching her with interest. Lucas. She didn't know who he was, but there was something about him, an aura of power, of confidence, of danger. And yet, when he smiled, it was warm, inviting. "You look like a bird trapped in a golden cage," he murmured, his voice smooth as silk. "And I think I might be able to set you free." Mona's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't spoken to anyone outside of Miller's world in weeks. She had forgotten what it felt like to be addressed with something other than possessiveness, control, or obsession. This man was offering her something different. Freedom. "Who are you?" she asked hesitantly, stepping closer to the gate. Lucas tilted his head, studying her with amusement. "Someone who can help you escape," he said simply. "You don't belong to him, Mona. You don't belong in a world of chains and obsession. You're too beautiful, too pure, to be wasted on a man like Miller." The way he said Miller's name made her pause. "You know him?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Lucas chuckled, his gaze darkening. "Oh, I know him very well, and I know exactly what he's done to you." Mona's stomach twisted. Did he really know? Did he know what Miller had taken from her, what he had turned her into. Shame burned through her, but at the same time, hope flickered. This man was offering her a way out. Could she trust him? Could she take his hand and finally be free? But something in his eyes made her hesitate. There was something hidden beneath that charming smile. Something she couldn't quite place. "Why would you help me?" she whispered. Lucas's smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something darker in his expression. "Because, Mona," he said softly, "I hate Miller, and taking you from him would be the greatest revenge I could ever have." The words hit her like ice. She took a step back, her mind spinning. Was she just a tool in a war between two powerful men? She had spent so long being trapped under Miller's control. Was she about to step into another man's trap? Lucas must have sensed her hesitation because he reached out a hand through the bars, his voice dropping into something almost pleading. "I can give you the life you deserve, Mona. Away from all of this. Away from him. Let me take you away." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to take his hand, to run far away and never look back. But deep in her heart, something held her back. Doubt, fear, and something else she didn't want to admit. A pull toward Miller that she couldn't explain. As much as she hated him, as much as she wanted to be free, she wasn't sure if she could truly leave him, and that realization scared her more than anything. Despite his arrogance and cruelty, Miller loved her, and no matter how much she tried to deny it, a part of Mona wanted to believe him. The days that followed were filled with surprises. Miller was different. He no longer barked orders at her, no longer treated her like something he owned. Instead, he courted her like a man deeply in love. He showered her with gifts, not just expensive jewelry and designer dresses, but things that held meaning. A first edition of her favorite book, a delicate bracelet with her initials engraved, a painting of the sunset because he had noticed how much she loved watching it. He even attempted to cook for her once, though it ended in disaster when he nearly set the kitchen ablaze. Mona had laughed and Miller had memorized that sound, craving to hear it again and again. He learned her. He studied her. He loved her. And slowly, Mona's walls began to crack. She noticed the way his eyes softened whenever he looked at her, the way his touch had grown gentle instead of possessive. Her heart betrayed her every time he was near, lingering in his presence far longer than she intended. One night, as they stood beneath the stars, Miller reached for her hand, just like he had on the balcony. This time, Mona didn't pull away. She let him hold her, and when he whispered, "Let me love you, Mona," she didn't say no, because maybe, just maybe, he already had. Days passed in a blur of emotions she couldn't control. She had once despised him, feared him, wanted nothing but to escape. But now when he was near, her heart no longer screamed in terror. It fluttered, hesitated, betrayed her. How could she possibly feel this way for the man who had shattered her world? But Miller was changing, and so was she. One evening, as she stood by the garden watching the sky shift to hues of pink and gold, she felt his presence behind her. He had kept his distance, careful not to push her, but she could feel his eyes on her, burning with emotions he dared not voice. "You've been avoiding me." His deep voice broke the silence, sending a shiver down her spine. Mona's fingers tightened around the folds of her dress. She had avoided him because every time she faced him, she felt herself weakening. "I haven't," she whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. Miller stepped closer, cautiously, as if afraid she would run. "Then look at me." She did, and it was her mistake. The moment her eyes met his, she felt her walls begin to crumble. He was no longer the ruthless CEO who had stolen her innocence. He was just Miller, a man who had lost himself in her, a man desperate to prove he could love. Her chest tightened as his words came, raw and unguarded. "I can't lose you, Mona. I can't breathe without you. The moment I realized what I had done to you, I knew I could never forgive myself. But more than that, I knew I could never let you go." It shook her to her core, the honesty in his voice, the regret that darkened his stormy eyes. She wanted to deny it, wanted to scream that it was too late. But when his trembling fingers reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. "Mona," he whispered, his touch unbearably soft. Tell me you don't feel this. Tell me you don't feel me the way I feel you. Her breath caught. She wanted to lie, to push him away. But the truth consumed her. I. She faltered, but Miller didn't rush her. He simply held her, waiting. And in that moment, Mona realized she was standing on the edge of something she could no longer escape. Something that would change everything. She was falling. Against her will. Against her mind. But not against her heart. And perhaps she already had.